Hello, if you're watching this video, first off, thank you. Second, we need to have a talk with your league commissioner. Now, it is hard to believe that we are finally here, week 18 of the NFL season. Many championships, they have already been won. However, for the few, the proud, the fantasy degenerate, we are still seeking fantasy football glory this week. Week 18 isn't just important for fantasy football enthusiasts, it's one final chance for many of these wide receivers to put a little extra cash in their pocket heading into the new year. An opportunity to set personal bests while reaching those incentives. Now, I've learned many things in my day, and the one thing that I've learned probably more than anything else is you never mess with another man's money, and there's money to be made here in week number 18. So here are your RotoBaller week 18 starts and sits at the wide receiver position, starting with Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as they take on the New Orleans Saints. Death, taxes, and Mike Evans winning fantasy championships. Last Sunday, Evans caught 8 of his 9 balls thrown in his direction, accounting for 97 receiving yards and a pair of touchdowns. That worked out to 29.7 fantasy points. And with that performance, not only is Evans 85 yards shy from his 11th consecutive 1,000-yard season to begin his career, but if he can get 85 yards this week and haul in 5 receptions, it's going to trigger a $3 million bonus as he caught his 10th and 11th touchdown last week in that victory against the Carolina Panthers. Since week number 12, Evans has averaged 21.2 fantasy points per contest and produced 127 fantasy points. Only Puka Nacua and Justin Jefferson have been more productive for fantasy managers over that period. Now, one team that has historically held Evans down has been the New Orleans Saints. However, much of that has been attributed there to Marshon Lattimore. Now, the good news is Evans, his march towards history, Lattimore is not going to be a factor in that as he is no longer a Saint. So when we take a look at this, we don't have to worry about him getting caught up in those extracurricular activities. No Lattimore means the Saints secondary is ripe for the picking. Number 2 wide receiver I'm firing up this week. How about Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets as they take on the Miami Dolphins? There is nothing more that the Jets would want to do at this point in their season than to end the playoff hopes of the Miami Dolphins. The Jets, they may make a point to get Davante Adams to 1,000 yards receiving as he sits 25 yards shy of his 5th consecutive 1,000-yard season. Then there's the matter of Aaron Rodgers sitting 1 passing touchdown shy of 500 on his career. There is a good chance that both those milestones are met this week. There's also a good chance that we're going to see plenty of Jalen Ramsey lined up across from Davante Adams. While Adams is looking for that 1,000-yard season, Garrett Wilson, he hit that mark last week with 66 receiving yards against the Buffalo Bills. Wilson, he heads into week 18, 3 receptions shy of 100 on the season. He's got 149 targets. That sits 4th behind Malik Neighbors, Jahmyr Gibbs, and CeeDee Lamb. As long as Rodgers is willing, then Wilson should find himself in a productive outing here this week, as the Dolphins have allowed 631 receiving yards on 52 receptions over the last 4 weeks. Add in the 6 receiving touchdowns, and Miami allows 39.35 fantasy points per game to the position over the period. My 3rd wide receiver that I'm firing up this week is Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions against the Minnesota Vikings. We know that this game is going to turn into a shootout. Neither one of these teams is competent enough to stop the other team's passing attack. That means you're starting Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison of the Vikings, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown, and yes, Jameson Williams of the Lions. Williams is likely coming into this one with the lowest price point. After all, heading into Monday Night Football's Week 17 contest, his 13.7 fantasy points per game, that ranks 27th amongst his peers and behind the aforementioned wide receivers. Now, Williams, he's going to seek retribution after being held to just 1 reception for -4 yards the last time that these teams met. You're going to want to get in on the action this week. Whoever you could possibly get, put him into your DFS lineup, whatever you have to do. And Williams, he offers you the best bang for your buck, having produced 11 or more fantasy points in 5 of his previous 6 contests before the conclusion of week number 17. Now, week 18 sits, it starts with Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams as they take on the Seattle Seahawks. I have been given no reason whatsoever to remove Cooper Kupp from my list. Again, last week, when fantasy managers needed him the most, 1 reception, 29 yards. That's right, Kupp produced a minuscule 3.9 fantasy points on 3 targets against the Arizona Cardinals. Over the last 3 games, Kupp has just 4 receptions on 9 targets for 53 yards. And Kupp's last 100-yard performance, that came back in week number 11 against the New England Patriots. If you're looking for a silver lining, by the way, I wouldn't. The last time that the Rams and the Seahawks met, Kupp was featured in this offense, hauling in 11 of 14 targets for 104 yards. That production, it came at Puka Nacua's expense, as Nacua had just 1 reception for 14 yards on that day, and we haven't seen Puka Nacua been the second option in quite some time. If I play in a Week 18 fantasy football league, many of you are calling me crazy, and you know what? You're not wrong, but even I'm not crazy enough to start Cooper Kupp when there's money to be made. Now, the second wide receiver I'm sitting this week is Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers as they take on the Arizona Cardinals. Before the conclusion of Week 17, Jennings had produced just one fantasy performance, more than 10 fantasy points in his last 5 outings. That was a 28-point performance in week number 14, stuck in between a 9, an 8.6, a 5.1, and a 9.1 point outing. In Week 18, Jennings and the 49ers face a Cardinals secondary that, 1, just limited Kupp to just a single reception, and 2, have held receivers to 497 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. For fantasy, that works out to about 28.75 fantasy points per game. That is the 6th fewest. Now, Jennings, he's been good this season. His 65.8 receiving yards per game is something that Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel have topped only once. That said, Week 18 is not the time to get cute in a less than favorable matchup. And another guy that simply is not cute, it is Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers against the Chicago Bears. A good friend of mine wanted to know what happened to Jayden Reed this season. He would then go on to point out that in weeks 1 through 9, Reed averaged 81 yards per contest. If you take weeks 2 through 9 into the equation there and drop that week number 1, that works out to about 71 yards per game. However, that isn't even the most significant drop-off in production. From weeks 10 through 17, Reed is averaging just 34 yards per game and averaging 8.4 fantasy points per game. Somehow, Reed has done something no one else has been able to do, and that is find the Bermuda Triangle of fantasy production. Since week number 11, Reed has just one game in which he has topped more than 10 fantasy points. Over that period, Reed has averaged 3.7 targets per game, accounting for a lowly 14.9% target share. His 189 receiving yards, that works out to about 12.3% of the Packers' receiving market share in those 7 weeks. Drops, those haven't helped him either, as he has dropped 4 out of his 26 targets. That's 15.4%, despite seeing an 84.6% catchable ball rate. Only the 49ers have allowed fewer than the 29.29 fantasy points per game, which the Bears have been allowing this season. A tough matchup with a case of the yips, with a splash of inconsistency thrown in there, means I'm keeping Reed about as far away from my fantasy lineup as possible. But if I want to get close to winning championships, I need to head to RotoBaller.com today for all the latest news and fantasy analysis. And head over to the RotoBaller Discord channel, where you'll catch me there 24/7 answering all your fantasy football questions. See you next time.